Hey guys, it's Proc, and today I want to show you guys my favorite funny metas on Geoguessr, or just some super obscure and niche metas that are so obscure that they start to become funny. Now, I did not choose these metas based on how useful they are or how reliable they are, so if you guess on one of these and it turns out to be wrong, don't come crying back to me because I do not vouch for them whatsoever. But I have noticed these throughout my time playing, and some of them are some pretty popular metas that are just also funny. Some of them are lesser known, and some of them are even original ones that I've noticed. All right, so let's get into it. First one here, we're going to be looking at the height of signs in Europe. So sometimes Southeastern Europe, Balkan, or even Eastern Europe can kind of be hard to tell apart from each other. Here, for example, is a Romanian sign, pretty standard sign height, I would say. But if you go over the border into Romania, you'll notice that a lot of the signs are just really tall. I mean, look at this yield sign. It's like almost above the camera of the car, which is pretty high up. Here's another Hungary sign, and you can see it's really tall. You can see tall signs, of course, anywhere, and I have no idea why they've done it if everyone's driving like jacked up trucks or something. But it is a fairly reliable meta I've found in Hungary. Okay, this next one is perhaps my favorite meta in the whole of GeoGuessr, and it's actually kind of useful too. So get ready for that. This one is going to be a mirror meta in Kyrgyzstan, but not the normal mirror meta with Osh versus the rest of the country, but the dirty mirror meta, which nowadays is becoming more well known. But back in the day, this one was killer when you got a Kurg round. So you'll notice that on some of this coverage, the left mirror is just filthy, like they drove through a puddle or something, or I don't know what. But you'll be able to see this dirty mirror on all the coverage, starting at this little fork in the road on the Narin River near Taskomur, and it goes all the way down to Jalalabad, just right outside the city, where they must have finally cleaned it off. But this one is 100% reliable. As far as I know, there's no more dirty mirrors. It also is the South Mirror. So yeah, that's probably one of my favorite metas in the whole game. All right, next one is going to be in Bangladesh, and it is when you have a guy in the back of the Google car just kind of chilling, like sitting on the open window or something, and he's just sitting there. And you can find this in two cities. So again, I've done very little like actual dedicated research for this video, so if this turns out to be unreliable, I apologize. But as far as I know, you can only find this in two cities, and that is Rangpur, which is that one, and Sylhet, which is this guy. And he's on the other side. He's got a different outfit on. Again, I've not done extensive research to see where. Oh, we went into the Gen 4. I should say this is only on the Gen 3 coverage. But yeah, fairly interesting meta. I don't think I've seen this before. I think there's a couple other countries maybe where you can find a guy out the window, but for whatever reason, in these cities, especially Sylhet, which I'll show you on the map here, it's in the northeast of the country, and it's far away from all of their coverage. So if you see this, it's probably a good idea to get Sylhet, especially because the Rangpur, which is over here, has much less coverage. And I was looking around in the city, and there's more coverage that doesn't have the guy sticking out of the car. Whereas in Sylhet, it seems like you can just stick your plonk down absolutely anywhere, and the guy will be there waiting for you. There he is. Thanks, bro. Okay, this one is fairly well known if you've done any Baltic streaking or practice in the Baltic region. This one's going to be for Lithuania, and it's when you see a bunch of tiny random blurs. So, of course, all countries have blurred things like sometimes street signs and license plates and stuff like that. But Lithuania on the Gen 3 coverage sometimes has a bunch of these random, like smaller blurs that don't seem to be blurring out anything in particular. You can see all of them on kind of going over here. And you don't see that in any of the other Baltic countries, or really any other countries that I know of. Sometimes you will see one-off little blurs that are blurring something random in other countries. So I would make sure to look around and make sure you can count at least like 5 or 6 of these to make sure you're in Lithuania. There are rounds here. I'll show you another round that has like a lot of blurs. So here it's just absolutely everywhere. Here it's 100% certain it's lit. But most rounds have more like, I don't know, 7 or 8. And I've seen as few as like maybe 4 or 5. And it's not in all the coverage. It's not the most useful thing in the world. But sometimes you're in the middle of nowhere. You have no poles. You know it's Baltic, but you're not sure which one. This can really come in handy. No idea what caused this glitch, but it ends up being really useful for when you're playing Geoguessr. Okay, this one is a Peru meta. This one's pretty funny. You may notice that there's no coverage here when the Amazon River starts to cut through the country because it's really hard to get over here with a car. There's pretty much no roads, and most of these cities are actually only accessible by boats, which can't be that big because it's not that navigable of a river. But you see, we do have coverage over here. There's just this one road between Nauta and Iquitos, and you will notice on almost all the locations on this road, pretty much every single vehicle you see is a tuk-tuk. So I know tuk-tuks are already kind of a pretty popular meta for Peru, but usually you'll see, a few tuk-tuks. Here, it's like kind of crazy if you see an actual car instead of a tuk-tuk. So this is in Nauta, and then this one is actually in Iquitos, and I mean, just look at all those tuk-tuks. This is more than you'll see in Bangladesh or anywhere else in Peru. And really, the thing to pay attention to here is the ratio. So some places that are popular will see a lot of tuk-tuks in the rest of Peru. But if you see a ratio of like 20 to 1 tuk-tuk to regular car, then you can be pretty confident that you're over in this region just because it's so much more practical to bring these things over compared to regular cars. Now it's time for a proc original meta, and this one is going to be the gutter meta in Belgium. So I'm pretty proud of this one, and it actually comes in handy a lot more often than you might think. There's tons of rounds where you're like, is this Belgium or is it France or maybe even the Netherlands? And I've found that Belgium just absolutely loves to put gutters everywhere. So you'll see they integrate it into the road a lot. You might not even notice it, but as you see here, these three bricks are making up this gutter. And yes, they do have gutters in other countries. You can find them over the border in France and in the Netherlands. And usually there's some other clues. But I found that even in the smallest of little towns, they will try their very hardest to make gutters, usually one on each side of the road, in some shape or form. So if you're not sure where it is and Belgium is on your list of potentials, make sure to look out for gutters. Next, we're going to move on over to Southeast Asia, where they are notorious for having a ton of wires everywhere. So here's a Thailand location where, we've got a lot of wires, but there's at least some semblance of like organization. Like someone tried to organize this. Yeah, they had to use a lot of wires, but they tried their best. Here's one in Indonesia. We got a lot of wires, but they've got things in place to try to organize it. Whereas in the Philippines, there is just absolutely unmitigated chaos in a lot of these rounds. This has been a lot more reliable than I thought it would have been when I first started to use it. Here's another Filipino round with it's just awful. There's just so many wires, and there's a lot of them that are cut, and they're not like this one is actually pretty well organized for a Filipino round, actually. But if you're ever in a situation, even in rural rounds where not sure which country you're in Eastern or Southeastern Asia, Filipino wire meta is real and true. Okay, so the next one's actually a pretty well-known meta, but in case you haven't heard of it, it's the Indonesian cigarette ad meta. I do not understand how any Indonesians are still alive and haven't died from like lung cancer or something, because there are so many of these ads. It's crazy reliable. You're in some random town in the middle of nowhere, you are almost guaranteed to see multiple of these ads advertising cigarettes. Sometimes they're kind of hard to tell what it's actually advertising. They don't usually say the word cigarette on them or anything, but usually if you see a price, it says like RP something from 10 to 16,000, and it's something that looks kind of like this, then it's a cigarette. They're just absolutely everywhere. I literally went to some random town of like 2,000 people, and you'll find them. So I don't know why there's so many of them everywhere, but it's actually a really, really reliable meta, especially considering there's almost none of these in any other countries that you might confuse with Indonesia. All right, so this meta is in South Korea, and this is something I wish were a little bit more reliable, and there might be something that you can use to tell them apart. And if you do know of something like that, please let me know because I would love to use this more often. So this meta is the backup camera meta on the Korean car. So usually, as you'll probably know, Korea just has a regular black Google car. And you see other clues, you see that, okay, I sent Korea. And it's notoriously difficult to region guess within Korea. But there are two places that have this special, I think it's a backup camera added on to the back of the car. And the two places, here's the first one. This is right outside of Pohang and within the city. And then the second one is north of Seoul. So those are two places which are kind of far apart. I'll show you on the map here. So north of Seoul, there's a lot of coverage that doesn't have it, of course, but quite a bit of it does north of Seoul. And then the other one is in the opposite corner of the country over here in Pohang. And this one's a lot more reliable in terms of almost all the coverage having it. But as of now, I haven't really found a great way to tell them apart. It's a pretty small country, but it is useful. And I just always send Pohang because like everybody sends Seoul, but if it is Pohang, you'll look really cool. Okay, this is one of my more recent metas that one of my friends noticed, and this is the Mexican yellow bridge guardrail thing meta. So not the best name, but you will notice in Mexico, if you're going across a bridge that's of any good size and there's not a guardrail, then there's almost always going to be one of these yellow, like, I guess it's a different type of guardrail. So there are many bridges that just have regular guardrails, and there's also some bridges that have nothing or just have a concrete curb that's not colored. So this isn't so much a clue to say that you're not in Mexico, but to when you do see it, you know that you probably are in Mexico as opposed to another Latin American country or the U.S. on a round like this that you might think is this Arizona or the U.S. I have seen even some yellow painted curbs, sorry, around smaller bridges. Here's another yellow guardrail to give you an idea, a little bit different this time. But it seems like for most of the guardrail type things that aren't the standard guardrail that they use along the sides of bridges, they'll paint them yellow for visibility. And this is shockingly useful. I didn't know about this meta until a couple of weeks ago, and I've been doing a lot of country streaks, and it's actually saved me on quite a few rounds. So I would recommend learning this one. Okay, so this one is one of those metas that's just funny because of how much you doubt yourself when you're actually looking at a location. I didn't include the Estonia green blur in this video, but that's another one of those sort of things where you're kind of, is it there or isn't it there? And it's like, you can kind of convince yourself one way or the other. This one's maybe a little bit better than that, but this is for Finland. So they just released the new Finland Gen 4, and it can sometimes be hard if you don't have some of the good clues to tell if you're in Sweden or Finland or even some of the other surrounding countries like Estonia. But one meta I found to be really useful, another one from one of my friends, is shorter plates in Finland. So if you compare this to a regular EU plate, it just feels a little bit shorter. I don't know if they actually are shorter. I think they must be. But it's fairly reliable. I thought this was going to be a fake meta when I first heard of it, but I've been using it more and more, and it's just, they're just a little bit shorter. And I'd recommend going into some Finland rounds, try maybe in a city so you can see some parked cars, and compare it with something like Sweden or Estonia, and you'll be surprised how much shorter these actually feel. So let me know if this does end up being useful for you. All right, so this one, I think it might be a Steak or maybe a Rainbow meta. I can't remember where I first heard of this, but this is a North Macedonia follow truck. It's not an actual follow car or anything, but for a large portion of a highway in North Macedonia, this green semi-truck or like cargo truck is following you along the E65. So I'll show you where it's actually following you here. So it stops around this city of Kichevo on the 65, which is, as you can see, in the western part of the country. And it starts right at Arby Novo. So it's this whole section of the highway. I know this is like a super obscure and niche meta, but if you look at North Macedonia, there's really not a whole lot of coverage, and almost all of it is on highways. And I've actually used this meta a couple times in my real games. So it's not like so useless that you shouldn't learn it. And it's pretty easy to remember. It's just there's only one Western highway that's even covered, and it's a good portion of it that it's actually following. So just plonk somewhere in the middle if you see that. And yeah, I'll just go into a random location to show you that you can see it pretty much everywhere. It's pretty, like, once you notice it, you can't stop noticing it. If you don't know about it, then you'll just think it's a random truck. But once you've started noticing it, it's very, like, it's really there. So yeah, pretty short area that it's actually in, but like I said, not a lot of coverage overall. So actually more useful than you might think. Okay, this is going to be another fairly specific meta, but if you get it, it will get you huge points. So this is going to be the Chile cabbage meta. You've probably heard of the Hokkaido or Sakhalin cabbage meta, but this one is a little bit different of a plant. It's not cabbage. I have no idea what it actually is, But these plants with these huge leaves, it looks like maybe taro, or again, I have no idea what this actually is. But it's found in a very specific place in Chile. So here's another example of it. You can see it along a highway here. They're really big. They're kind of hard to miss. And they're only in an extremely specific region of Chile. So if we take a look at the coverage here, especially over on the east here, there's really not a lot of coverage. So you'll find these starting where the coverage starts right here, and then it goes down to Chai 10, and then a little bit, it starts to kind of fizzle out really kind of just south of here in this valley. And then on the western island, it's, in this major city near Castro. But even as soon as you go up to the top of the island or the bottom of the island, you stop seeing it. So, of course, you can see a couple plants, but when you see a lot of them, you're almost certainly right here or right here. So either on the east or the west of this little island in the south of Chile. So, if you don't know this meta, you're probably just going to guess Santiago, maybe Temuco, if you're feeling a little bit more south. But if you see those plants, you can confidently send either side of this strait. Okay, and for the last meta, this is one that I swear by, another Croc original that I'm sure a lot of people notice, maybe even subconsciously, but this is going to be for Uruguay. So sometimes the Uruguay-Argentina 50-50 is a little bit difficult. I remember it was difficult before I started learning a lot of things like poles. Of course, if you see the trident poles and stuff like that, you can be pretty confident. But sometimes you don't have those sorts of clues. So the clue that I like to use in Uruguay is the puddles. So it sounds kind of crazy, but I swear to God, puddles are all over in Uruguay. And if it's not puddles, it's this kind of overcast, rainy-ish coverage, which if you go across the border in Argentina, you're going to see mostly sunny summer coverage. And because Uruguay is still only the Gen 3, which they covered in like the span of not that long, it all looks really similar. And if you just plonk down in a random location, all right, I hope we get lucky here. Okay, maybe this is a bad example because there's an actual river here, but you get the idea of this kind of overcast, like wet-ish environment. Of course, there are locations that are on dirt roads and are very dry, but for the most part, I tend to notice a lot of times when I'm on one of those rural dirt roads, there's at least one or two puddles somewhere. Here's another one. Look at that beautiful Uruguay puddle. I'm telling you, this is a very reliable meta. All right, guys, that's going to be all for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like. It really does help encourage me. I do apologize for there being such a long time between this video and the last one, but some things came up. I was doing a lot of traveling, and so instead I was just passively collecting some of my favorite super niche or funny metas. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you have any more funny metas. Maybe I can make a second one of these videos if I get enough of them, or if any of these metas actually end up coming in handy and winning you a duel or something like that. But until next time, I will see you guys later.